You're listening to The Foundation of Wellness, a refreshing take on diet and lifestyle, with Jessica Dogert, a registered dietitian nutritionist, and Marisa Moon, a primal health coach. Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's me, Marisa Moon, and I'm solo today. We're missing Jessica. She's soaking up the sun somewhere. And we set up this awesome interview for today while we were at PaleoFX because we discovered this company named Kavaplex and met the whole family. And Cameron is especially instrumental to the birth of Kavaplex. You probably have no idea what Kava is right now. Don't worry, we are going to get totally into it. And before we start, I really wanted to let you guys know that July 14th is around the corner. We're throwing the podcast party. It's going to be a miniature wellness summit in Chicago. And I want to send a shout out to some of my favorite sponsors, collaborators, and speakers who are going to be a part of this awesome event, which, by the way, you can grab tickets at tinyurl.com/FOW party. FOW stands for Foundation of Wellness, duh. And a special thanks goes out to High Vibe, Organic Superfood Juicery. That's where Jess and I met. They are going to be slinging some acai bowls at this party, and they're going to have cool new things that they are debuting there. Maybe CBD extracts, you guys, that I am not even supposed to tell you about, so I did not just say that. And we've got Revitalab, this awesome mom and pop shop, like science lab / physical therapy type place in Chicago where you can get cryotherapy, you can go in a salt cave, you can get sauna treatments, you can do Normatec compression treatments, which you are going to get to try at the podcast party. You're going to get to try cryofacials with Revitalab. You definitely got to check them out if you're in Chicago. And Strength in the City made this all possible. I'll be speaking at Strength in the City again this summer, September 14th. They're throwing events all over the country, and Strength in the City's throwing a workout class. I think it's a HIIT training class right before our summit, and a yoga class that morning, and a brunch. So all of that can be found out at tinyurl.com/FOW party. And we should probably dive into today's episode, I think. Let's do this thing. I met Cameron George at PaleoFX. He's representing Kavaplex. Welcome to the show, Cameron. How's it going?
Oh, great. So fun to be here. I love these things.
So you have an incredibly moving story. In fact, I would call you a warrior. I cannot believe what you've been through and how Kava came into your life. And now you're like the Kava master. Let's not even play around. You really are. I just want you to start from the beginning. I mean, you and your family have been through so much, particularly you. Can you tell our audience what you've been through?
Yeah, I've got one of those really interesting healing stories. If you get into this world, you start listening to podcasts, start following some of the enthusiasts out there, you'll hear a lot of these stories of very unexplainable illnesses, chronic illnesses that send a person on sort of like a journey or an odyssey, I guess, to rebuild their health whenever, through whatever circumstances, unknowingly, environment, genetic susceptibility, all these things come together. And people end up in these very, very sick situations where they're chronically ill. And it sort of has to sort of stimulate an internal revelation about what is health? How do you rebuild it? How do you take care of this mind-body system? And how do you support it to heal? But my story sort of starts out. I mean, my illness sort of went way back. I had a lot. I mean, we call it a perfect storm, just because a lot of factors, like I sort of alluded to, came together for me that sort of got me sick, and eventually. When I was about 20 years old, the bottom totally fell out, and it ended up in this sort of explosion of very unexplainable symptoms from, it started off as the sort of standard like brain fog, fatigue, and ended up in a situation where I was having full-blown grandma seizures, convulsions, anaphylactic attacks, food allergies, all kinds of crazy stuff, and debilitating fatigue. It ended up in a place where it was like, not just like fatigue, it was like could barely move, couldn't get out of bed, couldn't walk eventually, right? Ended up in ICU for a period of time. It ended up in a really, really bad place. But a lot of the main contributing factors, I mean, this whole process of getting sick actually started for me probably in my late teens and early adulthood. We know now, after I've done a lot of really extensive blood work and testing and been in this whole sort of functional medicine realm for a while, that I have a lot of different, genetic variants that make me susceptible to certain things, as we all do. But some people to certain stressors and, that make people more susceptible to, say, toxins, for example, environmental toxins, or just stress in general. And that was certainly me, but I had I had a really unhealthy lifestyle growing up. I mean, I'm from the South, food, eating. I didn't really understand anything about nutrition, about, toxicity. I didn't have that sort of framework of, that people have today in this generation of just sort of general guidelines for things that may or may not be good to put into your body. I mean,
you were so young. You were in college, weren't you?
Oh, yeah. In this course, I had sort of an unhealthy lifestyle, from a dietary standpoint and from a lifestyle standpoint, in my childhood and going into early adulthood. But a lot of people do, and a lot of people don't get as sick as myself. So the only way that we know to explain it, without getting into the details, or that I know to explain it, is that some of us are born with certain genetic mutations that make us more susceptible to these things, right? And so whenever the stressor comes in, it's like the gene is the loaded gun, the environment pulls the trigger, right? The genes don't cause your chronic illnesses in most cases, but they can be a susceptibility, right? So then whenever certain stressors come, you're genetically more vulnerable to them, so you develop some really, really bad like health circumstances. But I also had some pretty egregious stressors. It wasn't just like a standard American diet and stuff like that, right? I ended up with some functional issues and chronic fatigue, in high school and even before that. And ended up on some pharmaceutical drugs that were pretty egregious to my system. I ended up on pretty high dose Adderall. Adderall is an amphetamine, for those of you who don't know, and that's a very egregious drug, just to put it lightly. I mean, it's chemically, it's basically the same thing as methamphetamine with an extra methyl group attached to it, and so it's I mean, you can imagine, right? If you have an already somewhat unstable situation going on biologically, and then you put that into the system, you can possibly have a disastrous outcome. And then also I was just heavy drinking in my early adulthood, and some pretty bad drug abuse that actually came as a side effect of some of the psychotropic drugs like Adderall, right? That sort of opened the door and destabilized my brain chemistry, which made me more likely or more susceptible to going after other substances to try to counteract, say, the side effects of those drugs, which is always how it happens, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we call them, like musical drugs, musical medications. There's always side effects to these really, really powerful drugs, especially the psychotropics. And a lot of times they lead to needing other drugs to control those side effects. Yeah. And you either get those drugs prescribed to you, which in many cases is no less toxic or no better, and we can objectively say that, or you go to the street and get them, or you end up just all kinds of imbalance, and it can derail your whole life, both physically, psychologically, and emotionally. And so, there were all these different stressors that came together for me: genetic susceptibility, poor diet, poor lifestyle. I also was an athlete growing up. I was an endurance athlete, and kind of to the extreme. I actually went to I ran in high school and college and at the elite level, and I ran marathons and actually qualified for the Olympic trials when I was really young. Wow. Marathon. So I was putting an enormous amount of stress. Overtraining was sort of part of my life too. And now, looking back, a lot of that was due to the fact that I was sort of using running as a drug as well, right? I mean, you get this massive increase in dopamine and endorphins that if you already have some depletion going on or your nerve system is a little imbalanced, you can use that to de-stress yourself. And then those kind of personalities, I think we all know those people, right? I was one of those people, like those obsessive, like endurance athletes that's out there just pounding miles like crazy. So you take that, you take extreme overtraining, you take, toxic lifestyle, toxic diet, a lot of, chemicals, preservatives in the food, a bunch of different other things, a few other bad chemical exposures. I was also in a moldy home that we found out had a huge Stachybotrys overgrowth, which is a black mold that produces a biotoxin that's very, very bad as well. People can get very sick just from that alone. Yeah. So a lot of these stressors, if you really sort of investigate people who have very unexplainable illnesses or, what they think are explainable, but they really don't know the origin of it, right? They just go to, an allopathic doctor and they get a label, which is just sort of like a, to categorize their symptoms, but it doesn't really tell them like what has generated the pathology, the disease process to begin with. If we investigate some of these things and look for cause, which is what we're doing in functional medicine, then we usually find, a lot of stressors, physically, psychologically, emotional stressors, and then also chemical stressors today, which, chemical stressors are probably the greatest contributor to the massive explosion in chronic degenerative diseases. The explosions that we're seeing in both diseases of hyperimmunity, like autoimmune disease, and hypoimmunity, like cancer, as well as neurological conditions like autism and things, which have an autoimmune component underlying them, which all these things generate inflammation. But so.
Did you ever find out what autoimmune disease you had?
Well, see, it was very difficult because I got into a situation where, so this is how it happened. Things slowly started to unravel. Like, the fatigue started, and then I started on this drug and that drug to try to counteract it, to try to counteract some of the just, sort of basic symptoms that I was having. And once you go that drug route, it can take everything negative that's going on and put it on. It's like fuel to a fire. I mean, if you understand anything about adrenal fatigue or, metabolic dysfunction, which is what, most people have that end up in these situations, whenever you throw amphetamines into the mix, it's literally the worst thing that you can do, right? It gives you instantaneous relief, but it takes from your body. It's going to sap your body even more, and it's going to inflame the heck out of it. It's really bad for your gastrointestinal health. It's just bad across the board when you're fragile like that. But, it sort of happened like that. It's like I slowly started to get fatigued. I slowly started to have, attention problems, had difficulty in class and stuff whenever I was in high school and going into college. And then, the drugs came, and then that added a whole new level of complexity. And then I ended up in a moldy apartment, and then it was like that stressor upon that stressor. So, it's really, I mean, you have to look at everything to explain why some people get sick and some people don't, right? It's like I was a really young guy, and actually most people around me thought I was the healthiest person they knew because I was running 140 miles a week, right? And I was in the best shape of my life. But just like we know with many bodybuilders and athletes, what's going on externally is not necessarily reflective of your cellular health, right? Yeah. Which is a very, very important thing to understand, right? Performance and longevity can be two totally different things. And I was in the more sort of like perform now type of thing. Do whatever I had to do, eat as much sugar and caffeine and take as many amphetamines or this or that to perform now. And it was robbing my body of its precious energy and its ability to produce it and inflaming me more as time went on. But all these stressors came together, and eventually the bottom fell out for me, right? Like, so how it works with neurotoxicity is you don't get sick right off the bat. You accumulate neurotoxins, whether it be from drugs or whether it be from mold toxins or whether it be, glyphosate or pesticides in the food or whatever. Or any of these sort of environmental chemicals that our whole food supply is inundated with. These things accumulate in the body, over decades, and they drive cellular inflammation. They accumulate, and you get this sort of crescendoing effect as far as like the toll that it takes on your body. And if you are susceptible, if you have the right susceptibilities in the right places, and you have enough of a stress load, right? Then eventually, the bottom falls out. We always call it like. In chronic disease, I mean, we use this metaphor called the bucket metaphor. It's very simple, right? It's like, everyone has their own stress bucket, representative of what their body can take. And every stressor, a physical stress, psychological stress, emotional stress, or a chemical stress, is a drop in the bucket. And some people genetically have smaller buckets than others, right? It's like some people have high susceptibility to things, so they have a small bucket. So it takes less drops and to make the whole thing overflow. When it overflows, that's when you start expressing the symptoms of your genetic weakness, which usually manifests in inflammation, in some form of either autoimmunity, which is what most chronic diseases are today, or immune crash, which can lead to metabolic conditions like cancer and things. So I ended up in the situation where the bottom fell out, and all of a sudden I had all these crazy symptoms. I mean, it wasn't like I just had one thing that was easy. To go into a specialist and be like, "You have this." It was like I had complete, I had all this cognitive dysfunction. It got so bad at one point that first of all, I totally had to stop working. I literally had to move back in with my parents. I was unable to remember things. It started with me losing my keys and that kind of stuff, but then ended up where I wasn't recognizing people's faces in my family, like that kind of stuff. And I'm 20 years old, right? It's like, this is crazy. And I would get lost. I couldn't go anywhere by myself. I had to stop driving. And a lot of this was, it was crazy how someone could get that sick, as far as like, neurotoxic illness is what I was dealing with. But so I had the extreme cognitive dysfunction. I had fatigue, which eventually led to extreme anxiety, right? Because for a lot of reasons we can discuss. But and then I had extreme digestive dysfunction too. I wasn't, my gut was very, very obliterated. I wasn't digesting food. I definitely wasn't turning my food into energy. I wasn't breaking it down properly. So I had all this stuff going on. So whenever you go in, and of course I went the whole allopathic route, of course, because that's where I was at the time. And
when you say allopathic, you mean like conventional, to general doctors?
Exactly. So you start out with your general doctors. That one doesn't work. They don't understand what you're saying, don't believe you, whatever, which is what happens. And then you go to another one, then you go to another one, then you go to another one, and then you end up traveling to different places to see this specialist. You end up at Mayo Clinic. You end up like literally getting every piece of diagnostic lab analysis that you possibly can out of that standard model, which would be MRIs and so all kinds of scans and blood work and so on, or standard blood work. And then whenever everything comes up normal or a little bit off, you're like, this is insane. There has to be more to the story.
Yeah.
There has to be more. These tests are not a true sort of full look at the health or the state of function that your body's actually in, clearly, because it's like, and so it eventually led, I was just getting sicker and sicker and sicker. I mean, I was getting so bad with my brain that accompanying the cognitive dysfunction was extreme depression, because what a lot of this was lack of neurotransmission, lack of brain chemistry that came from a damage to brain metabolism and so on. But, so that led to extreme depression, extreme anxiety, to a level at which, like, I was suicidal every second of the day, and it was really only the fact that I had a good support system that kept me going. Otherwise, I couldn't have fed myself. I couldn't have functioned on any level. I mean, it was just, I could have never imagined being that age and ending up in that situation. I remember just every day waking up and being like, how the heck did I get here?
Yeah.
Like this is like a complete disaster, and it's like, and accompanied by the frustration of not only nobody, sort of standard doctors, practitioners, etc., specialists of all kinds, knowing what the heck to make of it, or having any recommendations on how a person could rebuild their health, because they're, the business is all, surgeries and drugs. And it's like, drugs are partly what got me here. Like, I already went that route, and that's what got me here. And so I was frustrated, to say the least, because every physician that I saw either had nothing to tell me or totally didn't believe me, right? So, because you're always, written off as like sort of a hypochondriac. It's all in your head. It's like, it was in my head, all right, the metabolic damage to my brain and my, and toxin accumulation and so on. But obviously I got desperate, and I couldn't do anything else. And so I literally spent hours and hours a day, just using every bit of brain power that I had left, just scouring. It started out with scouring articles. Then I had to teach myself, because I had one person over here saying this, I had one person over here saying this. I had to teach myself how to conduct adequate research. And this came through contacting and, developing relationships with, different functional medicine doctors around the country, doctors, physicians, researchers, scientists. And I ended up scouring the medical and scientific literature and teaching myself how to discern good, credible information, scientific literature, from bad information or incomplete information. And so that led me down this whole, avenue of just, studying biology, studying physiology, trying to figure out what had happened and what some of the other forms of medicine are out there doing to help facilitate a healing process, or just to get myself any relief at all. I was happy, right? And so I ended up going the whole sort of, alternative and, functional medicine route, and ended up traveling around the country to different doctors and things, getting IVs of different nutrients and doing hyperbaric oxygen and doing a lot of these different, sort of, more natural or functional medicine modalities that a lot of people have heard of, and got some benefit out of those things. Started to get some benefit, but I really wasn't getting to the core of, shifting the pathology, which, we know now that a lot of this had to do with toxin accumulation in my body. Yeah. I eventually, long story short, I was on this odyssey for several years of just being in a totally, dysfunctional state.
Whoa.
And, this was like 5 years into it. And, every moment was certainly agonizing within this 5 years. It was some very dark, very rough years. But I eventually met a doctor named Daniel Pompa, and, we became acquainted, and I started working with him, and we eventually became good friends, and we work together today. I actually work for his group, Revelation Health and Health Centers of the Future. He has a network of several hundred functional medicine doctors around the country that he trains in certain protocols for a process called true cellular detox. And he teaches other principles like fasting and diet variation, and a lot of these things that really dial in these specifics like to a T. It's like next level biohacking. Just like we see from a lot of these other guys out there that are big, movers and shakers in the field. And I started, because I could barely think for myself, and I had seen a lot of this information out there, but he really helped me put it together and sort of coach me through it. I needed a coach in my corner to help me, to coach me of like when to do certain things, where to do certain things, talk to me about the science behind it, and to just sort of, solidify and package the information in the right way. So, we started working together, and this process, it was like I knew by this time, and especially after like meeting him, that the reason why I wasn't getting well wasn't for a lack of doing a lot of good things at that point to try to like, nutritionally and so on, but it was because I had interference in my body. I had this neurotoxicity that had accumulated in the tissues, and even more so after I got sick, because for reasons that I can touch on, but I hadn't addressed the toxicity thing. Yeah. And I had tried, I kind of knew at that point that I needed to do that. I needed to do something, to address my, accumulated toxic burden. But I didn't really know how. I needed, to work a system that would actually get me up to the cell level where people get their lives back. And this is sort of the process that I learned through him and his network, is that, most detox out there isn't real detox. It's too far downstream. Liver cleanses, colon cleanses, those things can be good, but they don't detox the cell. They don't get up and address the accumulation of toxicity deep in the neural tissue, deep in the tissues of the body that are really, really needing, that are really, really dysfunctional. These kinds of cleanses, just standard herbs, they just empty out what's sitting in the stomach, what's sitting in the liver, what's sitting in the organs. We know now that this accumulated toxic burden that's driving most of these chronic illnesses has to be dealt with at the cell level. It has to occur at the cell, and real healing has to occur at the cell. So they have a process that it's like a protocol, for using certain compounds to upregulate intracellular glutathione, certain compounds that are like the natural detoxification agents, and certain binders. They use certain chelating binders, like we have one called cytodetox, which is an amazing one that is in these small particles. It's a zeolite that's clean that can penetrate deep into the brain. So you have to use things that can reach the cell, but then you also have to use things that can help usher the toxins out of the body. And that's a long process. I mean, it's possibly even a topic for another day. It's a very comprehensive system for addressing detox at the cellular level, and one that doesn't happen in a week or a 10-day cleanse or something.
Yeah.
This was a process, a protocol that I carried out weekly for several years, and I slowly started to get better and better and better and better. I mean, I was, approaching detox in a comprehensive way for many, but that was the thing really that sort of finally was able to move the dial for me. And it wasn't overnight. It was the fact that once I started to reduce the concentration of endotoxins and toxicity at the cell level, all the other things nutritionally, when I went back and did these therapies like hyperbarics, and I eventually did things with stem cells and things, those things actually worked as where they didn't work before.
Oh, I see.
Because it's this idea, like you have to remove the interference, right? And it's like you can't build a new house, which is what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to reconstruct your body. You can't build a new house on top of a terrain that's just destroyed and uneven. You've got to flatten out, and you've got to clean up the landscape first. So that these new cells that your body produces, new stem cells and things that help heal and create new tissues, actually have somewhere to integrate, right? So that you can actually rebuild yourself and your health. So anyways, I ended up on that process, and finally slowly started to move the dial, and it took even several years to really get to a meaningful place. And it wasn't just one thing that got my life back. It was a multi-therapeutic approach. But when I was at the very, very worst of my illness, one of the main expressions that I alluded to earlier of my illness, or symptomatically, was I ended up with extreme anxiety. And a lot of that happens because in these neurotoxic cases, because the body gets so assaulted that it ends up in like a PTSD type of thing, right? Like, type of situation. The nervous system has been so assaulted for such a long time that, certain parts of the brain, like the amygdala, which is like your fight or flight response, start to become hyper sensitized to protect you, because it's saying like, you're doing something wrong. You need to get out. You need to fight this invader, or you need to get out of there, right? And so you end up with just blood levels of adrenaline pumping through your system constantly that are just out of this world. And mine got to such a point where I would go into seizures, convulsions, but then my immune system was also primed as well as my nervous system, right? So I would go into anaphylaxis off of certain foods. Like I got to a certain point where I was reacting to basically every food that was coming into my body, which I didn't even know was possible until this happened to me. And then it's like obvious. I got to where for a period of time, for several months at my very worst, before I met Dr. Pompa and started on this whole thing, I lost all foods. I mean, I for months before that, prior to that, I was losing food after food, and I ended up on like 3 foods that I wouldn't go into anaphylaxis and go into a seizure after eating. And then I eventually lost all foods, which forced me into fasting, which actually did me some good, but not, past a certain like period of time, only for, a short period of time. But then, eventually I started reacting to water as well, whether it be the minerals in the water. It was crazy. Again, it's like, I didn't even know that was possible. But it's like whenever you take a sip of water and you go into a full-blown seizure, it's pretty,
it's so scary.
Oh, it was terrible. So I ended up going several days at my very worst without water, and I was already dehydrated, because when you're this unhealthy, it's very hard to stay hydrated. And I almost died from dehydration and malnutrition. And that was really almost what took me out. I came very, very close, even had a near-death experience, the whole lot. It was that changed my life in and of itself. You get in these type of situations, and, you never look at anything the same, right? It's like, it's like freedom. Like you don't, only those people truly deprived of it actually really know what it is, right? It's like, being able to drink water or being able to just be healthy, being able to talk to you right now and not be totally out of my mind, confused, depressed, anxious, all those kind of things, right? Like that's massive, right? So I sort of gained a passion for health through this whole process, obviously, because I've been totally on death's door, totally deprived of the whole thing, right? But in regards to how Kava ties into this whole thing is because I mentioned obviously I was having convulsions and reactions to, so I couldn't, even whenever I first met Dr. Pompa, like I had come out of this thing of like, I was forced into this dehydration period, and they got me on some IV fluids enough to get me through it, and I was forced into enough of a fast that actually like helped stabilize my system, because fasting can do that a little bit. But I still was very close to the danger zone. I wasn't out of it, and I couldn't tolerate any good foods or supplements that I even needed to detox to start this process, because everything that I was taking, I was having reactions to, So I was in this situation where the only thing that would stop my convulsions was like a heavy dose of a benzodiazepine, right? And at one point I couldn't even take those because...
So like a benzodiazepine for our listeners is commonly like what,
Xanax, Valium, Klonopin, Ativan, Librium, all of those are benzos. So they're anti-anxiety drugs, but they're also anti-seizure, anti-epileptic drugs.
Okay.
They shut down excitation in the system. And they work on this chemical in your body called GABA, which is like the brakes of your nervous system. It's like the opposite of adrenaline, or glutamate, which is even more sporadic than adrenaline, but it counteracts and balances those. Whenever you're stressed and you're in PTSD, your body depletes all of its stores of that and its expression of that chemical, because it's driving the opposite all the time, and you end up in this sympathetic dominant nervous system, where when I wasn't having a reaction, I was out of my mind anxious to a level like that I can't even express, like crawling out of my skin anxious type of thing. So I was looking for something. I had done enough. I mean, by this point I had done years of research, right? Years of reading every piece of information that I could, just scouring everything from, Eastern philosophies of medicine, herbal medicine, plant pharmacology, nutraceuticals, natural health modalities, stem cells, all kinds of stuff. So I at least had, something in there, even though I had a hard time accessing it at periods of time. But I was looking for, Dr. Pomp and I, we were looking for, some sort of a plant-based analog to a benzodiazepine, because we knew that I couldn't get on the benzodiazepines like full time. I'd already been down that road. I knew that I would deteriorate. And the problem with a drug like that is that it doesn't it doesn't give you any more of those chemicals that you need. It just uses them up, right? It uses up your stores of them, right? So it's like, it's just like a stimulant, right? A stimulant doesn't really give you energy. It just releases your stored energy. So you feel it. And then once it runs out, then you're lower than you were before, right? Because it's sort of like sick the body. That's what drugs do is like, so I knew, and I'd been down this road with benzos, that if I started taking them regularly, then eventually my body would shoot the other way. I would get tolerance to those drugs. I would end up taking higher and higher dosages. Eventually it wouldn't work, and then I'd take it away. And then the seizures would have been 10 times worse, and it probably would have killed me. So it just wasn't an option. Wasn't an option to do that. And they're so toxic, and they're bad for your memory. It's like I really needed that, That's right. It's like the worst thing. So I was looking for something, some way of modulating my reactions and my convulsions, my nervous system, without the toxicity, without the addiction, without the depletatory effects, all that stuff, and without the cognitive dysfunction, right? And honestly, I really wasn't expecting to find anything, right? Because like the benzos barely did it for me, right? And they're powerful drugs. And it's like I'd been down the road with a lot of different – I mean, I had tried medical cannabis, got way too paranoid and reacted to it. It doesn't work in the same way as a benzo, so it doesn't – it actually made the situation quite a bit worse. I had been down the road with even trying, all kinds of adaptogenic herbs. They're not powerful enough acutely to shut down excitability. And so – when you get in looking for, something that could be a replacement for, say, a benzodiazepine that could work on these GABA systems in the body, you're going to come across Kava, because Kava is sort of seen as the ultimate sort of GABA enhancing all-star out of the plant world, right? And it's one of those things that, we know that it works on those same receptors as where cannabis works on different receptors. And it sort of acts on that system that acts as the brakes for the nervous system. But the problem is I had tried Kava before, like whenever I first got sick, or what I thought was Kava. I had been to the health food store. I had taken 10 different brands of Kava, Kava extracts is what they call it. And I ended up, something inside me sort of told me, like, I sort of need to re-examine this particular plant or see, like, did I get it right with that one? Because I had tried enough supplements and I was sensitive enough to know that there were huge differences between different sources of a lot of different, supplements and just things that I was taking. So I was like, well, let me just re-examine them just to make sure. Because I was sort of at my wit's end anyways. I was looking at all kinds of different exotic plants and things too that that most people have never heard of. But I ended up, talking to several, indigenous people, farmers, growers in the islands where Kava comes from. Because I knew that I had to sort of go to the source to find this story. Because something wasn't really lining up. Because if you read in the literature about Kava and in anthropological accounts, it's like this sacred thing, right? In people of the South Pacific, which is where it grows, right? So it's like this sacred thing with this like amazing reputation where everybody consumes it in these places and has for 3,000 years, and they just rave about its relaxation effects, and they say it's as powerful as alcohol without the side effects. And I'm like, what are you trying, So I decided to go straight to the source and started talking to people in these islands and stuff. And every single person that I talked to who is an indigenous person or a grower or, someone in the actual industry, I said, well, I've tried Kava, this, and they're like, no, you haven't. You haven't tried Kava. Those are Kava extracts. A Kava extract is like a shade of the effects of real Kava, because Kava has a very complicated composition, right? Chemical composition. And when you extract it with certain things like alcohol, for example, which is a solvent, which is what almost every herb in the health food store is extracted with, right? Is alcohol or some other solvent. When you do that, the solvent grabs certain compounds, and isolates them, but leaves a lot of the compounds that give it its full effects. So I was like, okay, well, yeah, that actually does make sense, because I didn't get any of those effects you guys are talking about. I just got a mild sort of chamomile-like, sort of like relaxation that just wasn't. Yeah. But for me, it was sort of like, that was sort of like trying to take down an elephant with a BB gun, right? It was like not going to happen. So, it's like that. My problems were way too great for that. So anyways, I had some of these growers started to, send me just, Kava in its traditional form, which Kava is, for those of you who don't know, I should probably, preface it with that. Kava is traditionally a drink that's prepared by South Pacific Islanders in the South Pacific, and it comes from a small shrub-like plant called Piper methysticum. And Piper methysticum actually means, in our language, it means intoxicating pepper, because it's a shrub in the pepper family. And, indigenously, what these people have done is that they would take the roots of this plant, and only the roots. They figured out that is the part of the plant that you're supposed to consume. They would take the roots and they would grind them down into a powder and then squeeze them into a bowl of cold or warm water through a strainer bag, some sort of a strainer bag, and release this full complex of living, active constituents into this water. It's very complex. It's not just one compound. And then it would be this full drink, and they call it the Pacific Elixir. And it's just it's a staple of the culture of the South Pacific Islands. Because it's been said to give, effects very much like alcohol, but without the drunkenness. So, social lubrication, meaning like enhanced sociability, cognitive activation, but a calm cognitive activation, like it's sort of in the zone sort of mode. You get more talkative, you get more friendly, but you also get very relaxed. So that drink is prepared by just taking either the dried roots or the fresh roots and preparing it yourself. So basically what I was told from the indigenous people is like, if you extract it, it's going to kill a lot of the compounds that end up in that drink, and you're going to end up with something that just gives you a very small hint. So I'm going to send you the roots, and then you can prepare it yourself. And here's the instructions. Here's a video of how to prepare it. So I started doing that. I started experimenting with that, and pretty immediately I was blown away. But something too about Kava is that there's a cumulative sort of crescendoing effect, which is the opposite of a pharmaceutical. You take a pharmaceutical, you get the most powerful effect the first time, right? And then you get tolerance, and it goes down from there. But because of the unique way that plant intelligence and the complex compounds in plants like interface with our biology, because we're both natural, we are in this ecology together, certain plants have totally opposite effects, or effects that are totally the antithesis of that. And Kava is one of those, where it sort of interfaces with the body and actually has an upregulatory effect, we now know, on those systems in the brain, like the GABA systems. So what that means is that it helps your body produce more of those things. So you actually, the longer that you drink Kava, the stronger the effects are going to be, right? It's sort of
like
helps,
naturally within you?
Yes, exactly, right. So naturally within you, but also the stronger the effects they'll be whenever you take the Kava, because you already have a lot of your own natural chemistry going now because it's been upregulated. So then when you add the Kava, you get more of an effect. So
interesting.
It's very, very interesting, and this is something that comes just out of plant intelligence. It's plant pharmacology. It happens through we can't do this or replicate that. Every pharmaceutical drug does the opposite, because the body says this is foreign, and it blocks it out, and it downregulates it. It depletes the system.
So you were making the drink yourself at a certain point.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Way.
Well, I was doing that through my whole process, in which it wasn't a huge problem for me because I was willing to do anything. I was so desperate, right? I'd make that stuff. And, the whole thing is that whenever you make this drink, you need this dried root material or fresh root material into water, and then you strain it out. You end up with something that is very much like muddy water. Mm-hmm. It looks like dirty water. It tastes like dirty water.
Yeah.
It doesn't, you can acquire a taste for it, but it doesn't taste good. I can't say that form tastes good. Yeah. And most people think it's nasty. So there's that, and then there's like the half hour that it takes to prepare it and everything. Oh. But I was doing this, but after about 2 to 4 weeks of taking it, I got this cumulative effect where I was getting probably after about 2 months, I was at the peak effects of what I was going to get from Kava. And I was blown away by it. Long story short, within 3 or 4 months, I was totally off all my benzodiazepines. I was there's really no need for it. And all of my reactions had reduced by about 80 to 85% probably. And I was actually able to start tolerating this detoxification process that I needed to do. Like I said, with Dan Pompa's network, was I could tolerate these binders, these chelators, these things that I could get into the cell, glutathione, a lot of these things that we use to slowly detox the body, which I couldn't do before. So it was it gave me this amazing leverage and this acute symptomatic relief, right? It wasn't the thing that got me well, although I believe that it contributed pretty substantially. But it allowed me to actually not only shut down the stress system, which keeps you sick and inflamed, right? Because if you can't get out of the stress system, you can't recover, you can't sleep, you can't heal. Because, recovery is the number one biohack, right? It's people, you miss over optimizing your deep sleep and your REM sleep, which happens on Kava as well. And, getting out of that stress mode to where you can actually recover it's the number one biohack and just basic thing you have to get right in healing, so...
So you spent all that time making the drink and getting it in your life so regularly, you probably were just wondering, how can I make this easier or taste better, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Because, after a period of time, so I was working with Dr. Pompa. He was blown away by the effects I was getting. And he had tons of other clients that were probably not as bad as me, but at least on that spectrum, because he sees some of the sickest of the sickest. People end up at some of these health enthusiasts after they've exhausted everything, right?
Yes, exactly.
And people doing cutting edge things in functional medicine, they're the last stop. So he was super excited about this. We tried it. He had me talk to several of the other clients, and I started, coaching them a little bit on how to use it and everything. And we were seeing just as good results, miraculous results in reducing sensitivities, reducing, increasing seizure threshold, these kind of things, and just getting deeper sleep, etc. It was just shutting down anxiety and allowing people to get a level of comfort, right? Because whenever you're in that crisis mode, comfort is not a word that you're even familiar with anymore. I mean, you're always in crisis. And even just giving them something that could just increase their mood and just give them some relief while they're doing all of the things that they need to get well from a dietary standpoint, detoxification standpoint, lifestyle standpoint, etc., and therapies and treatments and stuff, that takes time. That's the long game. This can intervene really quick and give you symptomatic relief and can help to rehabilitate the nervous system from other drugs that people are on, because almost everybody else that is in one of these situations, these neurotoxic situations that I've come across, has been given benzos at some point.
Yeah.
Because they end up in, maybe not as bad as me, like I'm like the extreme, but anywhere even close, right? You end up, some physician tries to give you benzos or whatever, and you might go after something else, CBD and other things, which that's great. But, CBD didn't touch any of my symptoms the way that Kava did. I love CBD. There's nothing against CBD. And in some cases, it's great. And actually is great stacked with Kava as well to increase seizure threshold. They act on different systems. But nothing touched any of these symptoms like Kava did. And certainly was, nothing was a replacement for benzodiazepine. But another great effect here is I talked about like Kava is like alcohol without the drunkenness. But it's more than that, because what I mean by that is that it doesn't make you drunk. It increases your mood, it increases your level of relaxation, but it doesn't affect your higher brain function. You don't become drunk. It doesn't affect your fine motor skills. So it's really, in incredibly high dosages, you can get to somewhat of a place like that, but that's not going to happen with these types of Kavas that we use in these dosages. But it actually enhances brain function at the same time as giving you all these effects. So it's like a lot of people will think, well, something that can help me with sleep and reduce anxiety was not going to be something that's going to like clear my mind. It's going to be something that's going to sedate me. It doesn't initially sedate you. There are some strains that do, but most of the strains that we work with just give you a calm focus, like a calm clarity, not like a jittery coffee clarity, right? It's like that alpha state, right? That sort of, creative thinking state. So it has effects. It has amazing nootropic effects in addition to the anxiety relieving effects. It's got, obviously I mentioned deep sleep, anxiety relief, but it also has effects on appetite suppression. And we know now from the literature, one of the things that's being studied for is its increase of fat burning programs in the body and of a process called autophagy, which is the state that your body goes into whenever it burns its own tissue for fuel, which is what you try to do when you're trying to get into something like a ketogenic diet to become a fat burner. But also it helps burn up your bad tissues, precancerous cells and all kinds of other things. So it was really amazing actually for me while I was trying to, because one of the things I was trying to do during this whole process was, switch my body from burning sugar to burning fat mainly, because this is one of the key sort of foundational things that we need to do to get sick people well. And I was not adapting very well at all, because being sick, it's just, you don't have that metabolic flexibility there. But it was phenomenal while I was keto adapting, right? And allowed me to intermittent fast easily because it suppresses appetite and increases fat burning. And that was sort of a side effect I had never read about. Then I started reading in the literature and it's all over it, right? It affects systems in the body that do that. And actually, where the big level of excitement is in the scientific community regarding Kava is its potential effects as a therapeutic agent against cancer, because it affects these autophagy pathways. Autophagy is like I said, it's a cellular recycling process. So it sends the signals to the body to shift the body into a mode to recycle bad tissue, bad cells into usable energy as fuel. It's the innate intelligence. And this is partly what Kava does. So it does this through activating autophagy and stimulating apoptosis and selectively targeting dysfunctional damaged cells. So that's actually where a lot of the biggest excitement is, because there are some people in the scientific community that think that real Kava might be a greater therapeutic agent against cancer than cannabis is. And cannabis has some tremendous potential as well. So there's actually a lot. It's actually one of the most studied plants in the world at this point. So, everything from those potential effects to to nootropic effects and anxiety relief, deep sleep, all that stuff I was getting. And I started to, during that whole process of me trying it with the other clients and things, we were noticing that once we started to get to the less sick people, that we were having a harder time getting people to actually do it to get the real effects, right? Because they're not as desperate. They're not as desperate.
Yeah.
Even if they're kind of desperate, you'd be surprised how many people will not drink this muddy water every day,
Yeah.
right? So even if they're just somewhat suffering. So the problem is that the extracts in capsules that were available didn't give the effects. The drink was just too tedious to prepare every day for a lot of people. So I started this idea of formulating a company back then to try to create some extraction methods that don't denature the kava and put it into a form that's both palatable and easy to prepare, or that doesn't require any preparation, that actually tastes fine and everything. And that was sort of led to years later, after Dr. Pompa and I started working together, I actually started the creation of the product Kavaplex, because he and I had been working together for a while, and I had started developing a lot of nutraceutical products for systemic or for true cellular formulas, which is it's a nutraceutical company that we started together. And so I had started into this whole process of product development and had been doing research and everything. So long story short, we developed a few extraction methods that use a special type of pressing that presses the root material at extremely low temperatures, that doesn't involve any grinding. It's a hydraulic method that pulls the full kava-lactone complex. Those are the active constituents, by the way. The active constituents in kava are an oily-like complex that comes out into the water, and it actually is just suspended in the water, but they're called kava-lactones. And it pulls out this full kava-lactone complex in an undamaged state, which we've been able to verify through lab analysis. We've done lipid peroxidation testing on the oils, thorough. We obviously we test it for all contaminants and such, but we've also done a full kava-lactone profile before and after. And the ratios, we do what's called a chemotype, where we can see the ratios and the amounts of kava-lactones to see if it's being denatured at all. And we have something that is basically in its exact form that it appears at in the plant, but without any of the excess tannins and root fibers, just in this highly refined oil, right? Wow. that we call Kavaplex. So the carrier oil that we use is sunflower seed oil, which sunflower is one of those oils that can actually be very unhealthy whenever it's damaged, because most of the sunflower seed oil out there is damaged through bad pressing methods or just going rancid on a shelf. But because we use the same pressing method with this, we have zero oxidation elicited to the sunflower, so it's actually a very, very good healthy oil for cell membranes as well, and acts as a great carrier for the lactones. So it was that, using the correct fats that are good to act as a carrier, but the lactones are an oily complex too as well. So
yours is the only product on the market that's like this type of extract, because there's so many other extracts out there. I think there are even capsules, and you're saying they're just not getting all the kava-lactones in there, so you're not getting the full benefit?
Exactly. That's exactly. So this thing in the plant world that we call the entourage effect, meaning that it's not just the effects of these plants aren't due to any one compound. Like with cannabis, for example, they're not just due to CBD, right? There's 200 different cannabinoids that work synergistically together, just like a musical orchestra. Yeah. Each compound is like an instrument, right? And some instruments play more front and center. They play louder, like they play the melody, and they're more important, right? But then you have all these supportive constituents that are like the other instruments that add depth to the overall experience and that give the full experience. So that's really what the entourage effect is in plant medicine, is that in order to get the full medicinal capacity out of these plants, you have to have all the intelligence. It's a living ecosystem, that plant is, right? All the compounds, the alkaloids or the flavonoids or in this case the kava-lactones and the other enzymes, they work together as a system. And when you isolate them, you get some of the effects. But there are other compounds that are in there that haven't even been discovered yet that enhance and activate and bring out the effects more and add more depth to them and make the kava-lactones more bioavailable or more active. So it's very important that with most of these medicines that we do not denature them. Some plants only have a few compounds, so you can get more of an effect by doing certain types of extractions. Like cannabis, you can get away with it more, but even with cannabis, you get a reduced effect.
Yeah.
So good, like these companies like Elixinol and stuff that you've talked to, they use like a CO2 extraction, which actually works not too bad for cannabis, because you do get probably the highest level of a full spectrum that you're going to get out of any solvent, which that's what you're using with CO2, using CO2 as a solvent. And solvents grab certain things, leave others. But that's pretty good for cannabis. It doesn't work with Kava. With Kava, you get something that's better than using alcohol or other chemical solvents, God forbid. But you don't get the full effects. So we had to find a way that was solvent free of applying pressure at low temperatures, which, most things, if you were just to, run it through a standard press, you would destroy most of everything because the temperatures are far too high. So a good friend of mine who's an engineer from Germany actually was able to develop this new pressing method. It's a type of hydraulic pressing method that is able to press at no higher than, 88 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very, very cold, right? Even cold pressed oils out there and stuff, most of them are above 110, and they're still have destroyed a good amount of the constituents. So, none of that would have worked. We had to develop a whole method for applying pressure instead of using a solvent to grab, because that way we squeeze everything out, just like we're doing whenever we squeeze it through a strainer bag, but we're not getting all the water and everything, so we can easily keep it shelf stable. Into just a refined oil. So this is it's new methodology. It's a patent method. Everything is verified through Kava lactone analysis and stuff. And the other thing that was very important, because obviously since I have a background now and neurotoxic illness and do all kinds of work with toxicity and everything, is getting the cleanest Kava material as humanly possible. And this was something that, throughout this journey, I mean, you can imagine, I mean, I'm extremely resourceful and became even more so, scavenging to try to find answers to get my life back over years. So I literally talked to every possible grower in all of the South Pacific Islands. So Kava mainly grows, it only grows in that part of the world because it takes 4 years minimum to mature a plant. And so it has to have a steady climate to facilitate that. And so it grows in places like Hawaii, Fiji, Tonga, Papua New Guinea, and Vanuatu is like the main powerhouse, the largest exporter of Kava in the world. And so we have sources in all of these islands, but it's our own. We work with someone who has built the cleanest Kava supply chain in the world. That can produce it at scale, because that's the problem, is that most of the existing Kava operations are using material that has been adulterated or compromised, which is not good, which can lead to actual bad side effects in the Kava, which is actually something I want to touch on real quick. Is that most people researching Kava out there, if you just go and you type in Kava on Google, now it's going to be mostly good, what you'll find, but you'll still get some remnants of articles talking about Kava-linked liver toxicity, which was a belief system that started in the early 2000s that came out of, a few studies out of Germany and Switzerland, where literally just a couple dozen people got hurt and ended up with high liver enzymes and some pretty significant liver issues after consuming Kava-like products. It was really the only time in history that we've ever seen this. Out of 3,000 years of history of safe Kava use, we had these isolated effects in Germany, and it all came from one pharmaceutical product from one pharmaceutical company that was trying to make a drug out of Kava, and they used aggressive solvents, sometimes alcohol, but sometimes also solvents like acetone and things, and they were isolating these compounds and they were denaturing them. But they also went up and they went to these islands and they were just looking for Kava lactones, right? So the classic sort of like Western mistake of just trying to take the drug out of something instead of trying to find out from the indigenous people, hey, how do you consume this? Is there a bad way to consume it? Is there a good way?
Yeah.
They just bought the cheapest Kava material they could find out of Vanuatu and some of these islands, and some of these unscrupulous farmers, these large scale commercial farmers, realized they didn't know what they were looking for, and they sold them their waste products. So they were selling them certain strains of kava that are not normally consumed by indigenous people, and they were also selling them other parts of the plant. We think aerial parts of the plant. Yeah. I touched on earlier that you're only supposed to consume the roots of kava plants, right? Because those are the ones where the medicine, actually the whole plant has kava lactones, but the above ground parts contain toxic alkaloids that are part of the plant's natural defense mechanism against pests.
Right.
And so the indigenous people figured out, 3,000 years ago, after experimenting, like they got sick when they ate the leaves and the stems. They're only supposed to use the roots. So they know that. But when they're ground up all together, you can't tell. So, leaves and stems are their waste products. So they were selling these pharmaceutical companies their waste products that contain these toxic alkaloids. And they weren't selling them the right strains that they normally consume. They were selling them the more like heavy, wild strains that you don't want to consume every day. And then they were taking those strains and they were using solvents and they were concentrating those toxins with the solvents. So then they ended up with something that was no more like kava than a caffeine pill is to coffee or cocaine is to coca tea, right? It's very different at that point. You've created a pharmaceutical. Yeah. And then they gave it to a few dozen people that all were coming off alcohol and all had compromised livers to begin with. So it was a disaster. And this thing was never based on anything that could, resemble good science at all. And actually, it led to a huge scare, and they got heavily publicized. It led to bans of kava in several countries around the world. That's been studied over the last 15 years now, and countries, basically all countries that created bans, now that the science has come out and they realize what took place, have lifted those bans. Right. The FDA knew that there wasn't, good grounds for it, so they never banned it in America. It was never banned. They just issued a disclaimer, like, yeah, you might want to be careful. We don't know what happened here. But now they're in the process of updating that, and there's some scientists out of Vanuatu that are working with the World Health Organization to establish a world quality standard that takes all these things into account, so that will never happen again. So that if kava is verified to be free of these aerial parts and free of other things like mold toxins and free of solvents, extractions and stuff like that. And also if it's these specific types of strains that we call noble strains, that's a classification term for a daily use strain. And those are the specific strains that indigenous people have been using for thousands of years. If you're consuming it, if you're paying homage to all of those and taking it into a form that they actually use it in, then it's considered very, very safe. Yeah. So it's a very, very safe substance. So that's important to know because people will see that and they'll understand that. So, yeah. Getting the good material was a huge, a huge thing for us, right? So I partnered with literally the best person in the industry, we've been working with them. And they have delivered us the cleanest kava from all around the South Pacific. So everything is verified. It's tested for, heavy metals. It's tested for biological contaminants. It's tested for mold toxins. It's tested to make sure that it is, in fact, 100% one of these noble strains. It's tested for mycotoxins. So it's very, very clean, and we put it into this form that's easily accessible and easy to take and use. So wow. That's
congratulations. You guys are really paving the way. I mean, when I was in Hawaii, I actually tried kava first time 6 years ago at a kava bar. Now kava bars are popping up all over the place. And I don't have anxiety, really. I'm not high strung. My husband really liked the way it mellowed him out because he deals with anxiety a lot. And I guess people like it instead of alcohol, too. So they'll socialize around a ceremonial sort of kava, which we did with our friends in Maui recently. They had the guy come over with the big wooden bowl and knead the kava, just like you're talking about, in the water. And it really tastes like this peppery, muddy, earthy. It kind of stings your mouth a little bit, makes your tongue numb. And it's room temperature. And then they won't let you stop drinking it. They just keep filling up your coconut with it. And I was like, I just want to go to bed at this point. But it really makes everybody in a great mood and totally relaxed. And when I saw your product on your table at PaleoFX, I was like, stop it right now. There is kava in this little bottle. And it reminds me of the taste because you can feel those plant chemicals. It's like almost numbs your tongue just a tiny bit, and it's very peppery, which I know means that you got the good stuff in there. And I really think this is like going to change some people's lives because it makes Kava accessible and doable. So I want you quickly, like before we start wrapping up, because I know we could have you on a million times more. You're such a wealth of knowledge, but if somebody wants to start taking Kavaplex, do they have to take it several times a day? Is one dropper full going to be enough per day? I know it depends what they're dealing with, but give us a few things to go by.
Yeah, exactly. So, the recommended dosage on there is, I believe, 1 to 2 droppers full, like 1 to 2 times a day. And that's, you can actually take in much higher dosages than that if you would like to, because it's not denatured at all. It's in the form of just, traditional Kava, basically. So, you can take really high dosages, but I would always start at 1 dropper, sort of see how you feel, and then sort of go up from there. Of course, if you get past like 4 droppers full at a time, then you're going to be using it up, quicker.
Yeah.
And so you just have to sort of see how you feel. But I always tell people to take the 30-day Kava challenge because of this cumulative effect that I've talked about, is that there's a percentage of people who feel it right away. Right? There's a percentage of people who feel a lot right away. There's a percentage of people that feel a little bit right away. There's a percentage of people that feel nothing right away. Almost all of those people eventually feel something after taking it for long enough, right?
Wow.
So it's one of those things that it's something that is very tangible that you do, generally feel that most people can feel if you take it for long enough. So I would take around, if you're just have standard, if you're just taking it for standard health maintenance type of thing, I would take 1 to 2 droppers full, once to twice a day. If you're dealing with more significant issues, you can go up. But if you're taking more than like 4 at a time, then you may just be sort of like wasting your money a little bit, because you're probably not going to get a whole lot more off of it by taking more than that at a time. You can. I mean, some people do, but it's just you're trying to find that happy medium of getting in the right place. But it's, the most important thing is just to take it consistently and to take it long enough. We only have that one strain. The Kavaplex right now is made out of a strain called Bargu. It's 100% noble Bargu, so it's a noble strain that's probably the most popular strain in Vanuatu. It's known for its really balanced effects. But just like cannabis, Kava, there are hundreds of different strains. Some that favor more of the sort of nootropic effects, some that favor more of the like anxiety relief effects, right? And that one's kind of in the middle, right? So it's like calm focus. There are going to be some strains in the future that are going to be more daytime, some that are going to be more nighttime. So, you have that too, that will be in the future. So,
well, I think that just from 1 or 2 droppers full, if somebody's doing the 30-day challenge and they're using it for general anxiety, I think that would be a good way to tell, because you actually commit to it and really see over time what it's doing for you. And you guys have a really awesome sale going on right now for Independence Day. So at Kavaplex.com, that's Kavaplex.com, they have an Independence Day sale for 30% off, which probably ends Friday or Saturday. So after that, don't worry, we have a special code, thank you, Cameron, where our listeners can always get 20% off using the code WELLNESS. It's not case sensitive, so just type in wellness at checkout and you'll get 20% off, because these retail at about $75 a bottle, which really, if you're getting 30 doses out of it and it's making your life that much better, is nothing. And then if you get 20% off on top of that, you are just ahead of the game. And I really am so glad that we met you. And I'm sure there's a few things that you might want to just leave our audience with. They've never heard of Kava before. They're thinking about trying it right now. Do you want them to follow your page on social media? Do you want them to read anything on your website that's really educational? Or do you want them to just do the 30-day challenge?
Yeah, I would follow us on, I would say definitely do the 30-day challenge for sure to start to get it. To start to get it in your system, once you sort of become acclimated to this and get these kavalactones in your system regularly, most people notice just a tapering off of their anxiety, or they just feel in a better mood, or they feel more cognitively with it, or they feel more grounded and so on. And then they can get, the really powerful effects, especially taking the long term. I would follow us on social media, Facebook and Instagram. It's Kavaplex right now. We're in the middle of constructing a large informational website where you'll be able to find, just everything about Kava, all of the studies, what's going on with Kava, legislation, what's going on sort of in the Kava community, what's, a lot of stuff about traditional use of Kava and different strains and being able to match different strains to your effects. And that'll become more applicable as we have different strains of both this oil. And we also have a line of shelf-stable drinks in the works right now that are actually quite a bit more powerful even than the oil. The oil is phenomenal, and it's great for everyday practical use. It's great for, for the convenience of having it with you anywhere you go. The drinks are going to have more of the recreational kick of Kava and more of just like the really, really powerful kick for those people that have real bad anxiety and, need, sort of the extra effects. So those will be really interesting because those are actually going to be fresh Kava, stabilized. So it actually has even all of the living enzymes like that you would get if you would just go to the islands and prepare it right there and take it. But, the most important thing is just to take it regularly. And, I would follow us because those websites are going to be available soon where you can get a lot more information, and we'll be announcing that on social media and such. And just remember to use that code if you get to the website after this Independence Day sale ends. And, it's really exciting. We've seen this explosion of things like CBD and such and where that market has taken off. I really believe that Kava is sort of one of the next things, and I think that it's this massively untapped, just amazing substance that, just like CBD was always there, but we didn't know about it until it made its way into the public sphere. Kava, a lot of this, we're sort of the first to this. We're really, really far ahead of this. Like no one is doing some of the things that we've done with Kava, with putting it into a form like this and, delivering the true magic of this amazing drink to people in a form that they can take it, but then also having the clean stuff, the safe stuff, the stuff that is, basically 100% free of side effects for all intents and purposes, and just gives these amazing effects too. And it's a great substance. The other thing that it's been studied for, real quick, is that it's been heavily studied in substance abuse and helping people. Giving people sort of an alternative or an agent that they can use to taper off substances like I did. Yeah. It's just been phenomenal for that. And when you talk about, a culture that is heavily addicted to opioids, heavily addicted to alcohol, and a lot of these toxic substances that aren't doing any of these chronic illnesses any service, right? When you have something like this that can give you sort of that recreational sort of like mood relief, but also be healthy and not and you can work, while you're on it. And this alternative to these synthetic drugs that are just such a hindrance in so many of our lives, or at least overusing them. It's just a phenomenal thing across the board. And, you'll be able to keep up with more of the research on our website for all of Kava's many applications and the cancer stuff that I alluded to and so on as well. So.
Yeah, it's amazing. You're doing some amazing work after everything you've been through. Now you're paying it forward, and you are here for a reason, Cameron. I can just imagine the things you're capable of and what you're going to do. And it's really an honor to meet you and your whole family. This is really a family-run business, you guys. They just started a few months ago. They are brand new. And as you can see, they are just breaking ground with this whole idea of Kava being able to be a part of your life in a convenient way that doesn't taste nasty. Good job, Cameron.
Yeah, that's one thing. It's like people, no matter how good it is, if it's nasty, a huge percentage of people will not take it. It can be the best thing in the world, and it's like it's got to be palatable at least. Well, and the drinks that we're making actually taste good. They taste really good. So it's like wow, cool.
I think that's why the Kava bars are mixing them with all this stuff like a Kava cocktail, and it's like they're just trying so hard to hide the taste.
They are, and unfortunately the Kava bars suffer from they are delivering actual traditional Kava, but they suffer from a lot of the quality issues that I just, referred to. The non-noble strains that can give side effects and make you feel crummy, and just, Kava's, there's all kinds of toxins, that we found in Kava, mycotoxins, because they don't dry the material, and it's just like coffee, right? It's like companies like Bulletproof have done with coffee. The same things apply to kava, and perhaps more so because it's a starchy sort of root, right? So it's mycotoxins are a huge issue, and like pretty much every kava on the market that we've tested has them, besides ours, because we put systems in place to circumnavigate that. So as far as purity, cleanliness, it is 100% organically grown, but it doesn't have the organic certification at this point because this strain is out of Vanuatu, where they do not have that, right?
Yeah.
So the farm is not, but it's beyond organic, qualification standards and such, So it's it's exciting stuff. I love it. I love kava, and we're really excited about making it available to people. As a great safe alternative to other things.
That's exactly what you're doing. So everybody check out Kavaplex.com and make sure to follow Kavaplex on social media. And you can send your questions over to me anytime at the Foundation of Wellness podcast, Facebook, and Instagram pages. And let us know what questions you have and if you did the 30-day challenge. I want to know. Thanks, Cameron, so much.
Yeah, thanks so much. So much fun. I love these things. So thanks so much for having me.